Welcome to another deep dive. This one is less about saving the world from a big bad and more about what it's like to actually live in a world where those big bads just exist, you know?
Yeah, like just trying to get through the day when there might be a manticore around the corner.
Exactly. And the game we're diving into today kind of embodies that whole vibe. It's called Little Devil Inside, an upcoming action-adventure RPG. And let me tell you, the development of this game has been almost as wild as the world it's set in.
Oh, absolutely. We've been following this one for a while now, right? It all started back in, 2014 on Kickstarter?
Yeah, 2014, they actually crushed it on Kickstarter. Raised something like over 300,000 Australian dollars. You'd think with that kind of start, things would have gone pretty smoothly.
Well, you'd think so, right? Big splash, big success. What could go wrong?
Oh boy, if only. It was all sunshine and rainbows for a bit. They even had a big reveal at a PlayStation event in 2020.
Right? That was a pretty big deal. I remember seeing that. But then after that, it went kind of silent for a long time.
Years. Practically radio silence. People were starting to wonder if the whole thing had just been scrapped.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing forum posts and stuff speculating about if it was canceled or not.
And then bam, out of nowhere, new gameplay footage drops.
Talk about a comeback story. It's like they went into hibernation and emerged like a fully fledged phoenix or something.
Seriously. It's been a wild ride. And the articles we dug into actually shed some light on what was going on behind the scenes.
Apparently, there were some internal team shakeups, some creative differences. They even decided to scrap Unreal Engine 5 partway through development.
You know, it's funny. It's like the unpredictability of the game's world seeped into the development process.
Makes you wonder if it was intentional all along.
Right. Like maybe that was all part of their grand plan to immerse us in the world of Little Devil Inside before we even got to play it.
If so, it definitely worked. I'm hooked already. But jokes aside, through all the chaos and changes, the developers at NeoStream have been very clear about one thing. They are making this game.
Absolutely. And they've shown that commitment in a really big way. They actually downsized the team to really focus on delivering a quality product.
It shows a certain level of dedication that you don't always see. It's like they're saying, this is our baby, and we're going to do it right, even if it takes longer.
Exactly. So given all that dedication, what is it about this game that's kept them going? What makes it so special? Well, let's actually dive into what we know about how it plays and see if we can figure that out.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to explore.
Okay, so picture this. You're not a mighty hero destined to save the world. You're just an explorer in a world that's kind of familiar, but also really, really weird. Like imagine Victorian-era cities, but then right outside the city limits, you've got uncharted wilderness teeming with all sorts of bizarre creatures.
Okay, I'm starting to get a Penny Dreadful meets The Witcher kind of vibe here.
You're getting it.
Yeah.
So your goal isn't to defeat some ultimate evil or anything like that. It's more about surviving in this world, exploring its mysteries, and figuring out how to navigate its dangers.
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
Exactly. And the gameplay really reflects that. It's this really interesting mix of exploration survival and classic action RPG elements.
So not just running around fighting stuff, you've got to think about resources, crafting tools, and making sure you don't, starve to death out in the wilderness.
Exactly. Because you're not some superhuman warrior.
Yeah.
You're just a regular person trying to make a living in this extraordinary world. So you got to be prepared. You got to be resourceful.
I like that. It adds a layer of realism to the whole thing. Makes it feel more grounded, even with all the fantastical elements.
And speaking of fantastical elements, did I mention the combat? Because it's not just swords and sorcery here. We're talking swords, sure, but also guns, grappling hooks, even cooking.
Cooking. Like you have to prepare meals to survive.
Yep. It's not just about fighting. It's about managing your resources, staying healthy, and making sure you're prepared for whatever this crazy world throws at you.
So you might be out in the wilderness tracking some mythical beast, and suddenly you realize you need to whip up a quick stew to boost your stamina.
Or maybe brew a potion to counteract a poison. Or craft a special trap to catch a particularly elusive creature.
I'm really liking this mix of action and strategy. It's not just about button mashing. You've got to plan ahead, think about your resources, and use your environment to your advantage.
And that's not even getting into the creatures themselves. Because we're not talking about your run-of-the-mill orcs and goblins here.
But yeah, I've seen some of the concept art. They're seriously out there.
We're talking griffins.
Yeah.
But also these almost Lovecraftian monstrosities.
Yeah.
Things you can't even describe. Things that would make H.P. Lovecraft himself say, whoa, that's a bit much.
So it's like a blend of classic mythology and cosmic horror.
Exactly. And it's not just about how they look, it's how they're woven into the world. They're not just random encounters, they're part of the ecosystem. They have their own behaviors, their own territories, their own roles to play in this strange world.
It's like they're trying to create a living, breathing world where the creatures aren't just there to be fought. They're there to be understood, to be interacted with in a variety of ways.
You might be tracking a mischievous gremlin one day, and then dealing with a slumbering behemoth threatening a village the next.
Sounds like there's a lot of variety in the gameplay, which is a good thing. Keeps things fresh and unpredictable.
Exactly. And it's that variety that has me hooked.
Yeah.
But let's get to what's probably on everyone's mind. When can we actually play this thing? Because the release situation, well, it's a bit of a mystery in itself.
Yeah, it's been a long road to get here, and we're still not quite at the finish line, are we?
Not quite. Initially, they planned to launch on pretty much every platform imaginable. Windows, PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, you name it. But now...
Now it's a timed exclusive for PlayStation consoles.
Yep. Which means if you're not on PlayStation, you're going to have to wait a bit longer. And here's the real kicker. There's still no concrete release date.
So we're in limbo. It's like they've dangled this amazing world in front of us and then said, just kidding, you gotta wait a little longer.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They have mentioned that they're looking for publishing options, though. So maybe that will solidify things and give us a more concrete timeline.
Fingers crossed, because I'm ready to dive into this world head first.
Me too.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in speculation about release dates, let's actually unpack what this exclusivity deal might mean for the game's future.
Yeah, because that's a whole other can of worms, right? There are pros and cons to consider.
Definitely. So let's dive into that next and see what we can figure out.
Okay, so timed exclusivity deals, they can be a bit of a bummer for people who don't own the chosen console, but honestly, they're pretty common in the gaming industry these days.
Yeah, it's basically a way for smaller studios like NeoStream to get some extra support from a big company like Sony.
Right, it gives them access to more resources, marketing muscle, things like that.
And for Sony, it's a way to make their console more appealing. You know, give people a reason to choose PlayStation over Xbox or whatever.
Exactly. It's a win-win for the companies involved. But for the players, it's a bit more complicated.
Yeah. Some people can be excited to get early access, while others are going to be stuck waiting who knows how long.
And that waiting can be frustrating, especially when you're really hyped for a game.
For sure. And this whole timed exclusivity thing also raises some questions about crossplay. You know, will PlayStation players be able to team up with their friends on PC or Xbox once the game eventually launches on those platforms?
Right. That's a big one. And honestly, the articles we looked at were a little vague on that front. They mentioned local co-op, but as for online crossplay between different consoles, it's still up in the air.
Which is a shame, because crossplay is becoming more and more common these days.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to break down those barriers between different gaming communities.
I agree. It would be awesome to see Little Devil Inside embrace crossplay. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens closer to release, whenever that may be.
Speaking of waiting, let's address the elephant in the room here. This game has been in development for a long time, and it's had its fair share of bumps along the way. So given all the delays and the changes, what are our realistic expectations at this point?
That's a tough one, because on one hand, the concept is so unique and so intriguing. This idea of exploring a world that blends the ordinary with the extraordinary. The focus on the explorer's daily life rather than some grand world-saving quest, it's refreshing.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not your typical save the world kind of story.
Yeah.
It's something different, something more grounded.
But on the other hand, we have to remember that this is a smaller studio, and they've clearly faced some challenges along the way.
Right. It's not like they have the same resources as a massive company like Ubisoft or EA.
Exactly. So it's probably safe to say that Little Devil Inside won't be some sprawling open-world epic with hundreds of hours of content.
Yeah, it's likely to be a more focused experience.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes those smaller, more intimate games can be incredibly impactful.
Totally. They can really make you think and feel things that a big blockbuster game might not.
What matters most is that they deliver on those core promises that have kept fans and themselves invested for so long.
Right? Like that unique blend of exploration, survival, and action. That distinctive visual style that harkens back to classics while still feeling fresh and new.
And let's not forget about those creatures. That's what has me the most excited, honestly.
Oh yeah. The creatures are definitely a highlight. They're so bizarre and unlike anything I've seen in other games.
It's not just about fighting them. It's about figuring out their place in this strange world, understanding their behaviors and how they interact with the environment.
It makes you wonder, what's the bigger picture here? What's the story that ties all these elements together?
Well, the articles we read hinted at a deeper mystery lurking beneath the surface, a reason for these creatures' existence. Something more than just being monsters to slay.
Ooh, I like that. It's like you're not just exploring this world, you're unraveling its secrets, piecing together a larger puzzle.
Exactly. And with a world this unique and mysterious, I'm really curious to see how they pull it off.
Me too. But before we get too carried away with theories and speculation, let's talk about something that came up a lot in the fan discussions we looked at, the combat system.
Oh yeah, the combat, it's been a bit of a point of contention, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, some people are comparing it to Dark Souls with its emphasis on timing and precision, while others are saying it's more like XCOM with its strategic turn-based approach.
And the truth is, we don't really know for sure yet. We've seen bits and pieces of gameplay footage, but how it all comes together is still a bit of a mystery.
Right. We've seen swordplay gunfights, that awesome grappling hook in action, but it's hard to say definitively whether it leans more towards fast-paced action or methodical planning.
What I find intriguing is the emphasis on cooking in the game. It suggests a level of preparation and resource management that goes beyond just reacting to enemies in the moment.
Yeah, you're not just charging into battle willy-nilly. You've got to think ahead, stock up on supplies, and make sure you have the right tools and consumables for the job.
Exactly. It's about being resourceful and adaptable, not just relying on brute force.
Imagine packing anti-venom and whipping up a stamina-boosting stew before heading into a swamp filled with giant venomous spiders.
It adds a whole new layer to the gameplay, and it ties into that blend of realism and fantasy that little devil inside seems to be going for.
It's not just about being a badass warrior. It's about being a clever explorer who's prepared for anything.
And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good cooking minigame in a video game? Especially when the stakes are high.
Exactly. Especially when you're trying not to get eaten by a giant spider.
Speaking of those creepy crawlies, let's shift our focus to the heart of this game, its world, because honestly, that's what has me the most intrigued. It's not just another generic fantasy setting. It's got this weird, almost unsettling vibe that I can't quite put my finger on.
It's like they took those classic Victorian explorer tales where you'd have maps with blank spaces labeled, "Here be dragons," and made a whole game out of it.
It's like they took all those stories about uncharted territories and the strange things that might lurk there and turned it into a living, breathing world.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate is how they've managed to blend those classic explorer vibes with this really unique visual style. It's like Victorian-era aesthetics meets something out of a Tim Burton film.
Right. You've got these sprawling cities that feel very grounded and familiar, but then you step outside the city limits and it's like you've entered a completely different realm.
Yeah, it's like the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to discover its secrets.
And those secrets often come in the form of some truly bizarre creatures.
We've talked about the griffins and the cyclops and those Lovecraftian horrors, but it's not just about how freaky they look, it's how they're woven into the world itself.
Exactly. They're not just random encounters. They're part of the ecosystem, the culture. In one of the articles we read, they even talked about how certain villages have learned to coexist with these creatures.
Yeah, like they've formed these symbiotic relationships that are both fascinating and a little unsettling.
It's like they're saying that these creatures aren't just monsters to be slain. They're part of a complex web of life. And your actions within that web have consequences.
It's like an ecological puzzle you have to solve, figuring out how to navigate this world without disrupting its delicate balance.
And that's what makes Little Devil Inside so intriguing. It's not just about conquering and dominating, it's about understanding and adapting.
And sometimes that understanding comes through observation rather than confrontation.
There's that one scene in the gameplay footage that really stuck with me. You come across this massive, slumbering behemoth, something that looks like it could destroy a city with a single step.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It was terrifying. But you don't actually fight it, do you?
No! Your objective is to figure out why it's suddenly become restless, how its movements might affect the nearby villages, and what you can do to prevent a potential disaster.
It's like they're saying, hey, violence isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need to use your brain instead of your brawn.
Exactly. It's about being resourceful and using your knowledge of the world to solve problems.
Which brings us to the big question. What is the story that ties all of this together? What's the overarching narrative that drives this exploration, these encounters with the strange and wondrous?
Well, the sources we looked at were pretty vague on that front. They hinted at a deeper mystery, a reason for these creatures' existence, a connection to some ancient power or event, but the specifics are still shrouded in secrecy.
Which honestly just makes me even more curious. It's like they've given us a glimpse into this incredible world and then said, okay, now go figure it out for yourselves.
And that's a smart move. It keeps us guessing, keeps that sense of wonder and anticipation alive.
It definitely works on me. I'm hooked. So for anyone listening who's looking for a game that breaks the mold, that blends exploration, survival, and action with a healthy dose of the bizarre and unsettling, then Little Devil Inside is definitely one to watch.
It's a game that celebrates the unknown, challenges you to think differently about the creatures we share this world with, and promises to deliver an experience that's both captivating and thought-provoking.
It might not have the grand scale of a AAA epic, but it has something arguably more valuable. A unique vision, a commitment to its core ideas, and a world that's just begging to be explored. Keep an eye out for Little Devil Inside. It might just surprise you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy exploring.